Good morning, I'm Myron Melton. I'm a consultant with KSDE, and I work mainly in the area of school mental health and social emotional learning. And for our report this month, we want to talk a little bit about the bullying task force. As a reminder, we have it here. We also have the PowerPoint on your curriculum website, so you can grab it there as well. As we talk about things like what's going on in the legislature, last year, this is one of those topics that continues to come up. Last year, there were 6 bills that were submitted in the legislature that either were all or in part dealing with this topic of bullying. Commissioner Watson in April commissioned this task force, this Kansas Blue Ribbon Task Force on Bullying. And in his comments when he commissioned it said when he is out going across the state, which you know he does a lot, he said this still is like the #1 topic that he hears from community members and parents, and felt like it was time that we really went back and revisited. Although the data has been actually improving across the state, we know it's still on the radar and still needs to be discussed and to be kind of honed in on. So I'm going to share with you just quickly today a little bit about the task force and the recommendations, and then we'll take any questions you might have. So first off, looking at the task force, after this was commissioned in April, the first thing that the commissioner did was select 2 people to co-chair. They had excellent leadership. He selected Dr. Rick Ginsburg, who was the Dean of Education at the University of Kansas, and he selected Mr. James Regier, who's a superintendent in Birmingham Whitewater. Did an outstanding job working together because they really came from 2 different perspectives. Dr. Ginsburg is a researcher. That's what he does, and he really brought this research perspective onto the current research to say about best practice. And then you had James Regier, who is in a district dealing with this on a daily basis. He brings that real practical side of working with teachers and families in his district. So they really did a nice job leading us. We had a 35-member task force. There were 4 people from the Kansas State Department of Education. Kent Reed and myself are both consultants that work in the area of social and emotional learning. We were a part of the task force providing support. And Pat Bone and Amy Martin are both administrative assistants provided support as well. You can see there the groups that were represented. It was really a broad-based organization. We had people from the State Board of Education, legislators, the Attorney General's Office, KSB, KNEA. We had district and building leaders who come from leadership roles, teachers, counselors, social workers, psychologists. We had parents who were represented, private school administration, higher education, and then we said, various advocacy and special interest groups. We had a lot of people on there who weren't necessarily from the field of education, but brought that advocacy role for kids. So a total of 35 task force members. I'm going to quickly just go through the 5 main objectives that we had for our group. A little bit later when we get to the recommendations, we'll talk more about these. The first one was to research and identify current bullying definition trends, incidents, and prevention measures across the state. So what do we know is currently taking place across the state of Kansas? Secondly, to coordinate with stakeholders to address relevant issues effectively to best meet the needs of students. So we had on the front end, we had this task force group that we're really a broad-based stakeholder group, and we'll talk a little bit about where that goes now. The third thing, review work in the areas of social and emotional learning as set forth by the state board goals, identifying possible avenues that can reduce and prevent bullying and cyberbullying. Fourth one, review current statutes, regulations, and policy to determine the need for change. And lastly, present a report at the December Kansas State Board of Education meeting, including recommendations to address bullying, cyberbullying, prevention, and training measures. So that was our task that we set out to address those 5 areas. And again, when we get to recommendations here in a bit, we'll talk about what our recommendations were to the board. So the first thing we did was we followed a model that we've been doing with a lot of our task force areas, and that is get on a listening tour. Go out and see what people are saying across the state. So we went to Clearwater, to Garden City, to Salina, to Girard, Wichita, Lawrence, and Topeka. You'll notice on the 19th we had a KNEA webinar. We did these during the day from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock at all these different locations, and educators weren't able to be present. So we did co-sponsor a webinar that was very well attended with KSDE. But that was our listening tour. So we would go to all these locations. We would always have expert testimony, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, but we always had open agenda time for people in the community to come and bring their concerns to us as well. Within that task force, we broke into these committees to really dig in on the research and do some work. So we had one group that was looking just at current data and research around bullying. We had another group looking at current evidence-based practices. A third group looking at policy, practice, and accountability. A fourth group looking at barriers and solutions. A fifth group looking at cultural awareness. And the last group was a kind of a combination of all of us working as a writing committee. So a little bit on the recommendations. The Kansas State Board of Education voted to accept our final recommendations, we will talk about in just a second. We took that on January 14th. They did approve the report, they did adopt the recommendations. You'll notice on that first recommendation when we get there, it talks about a unit. This gets assigned to a unit, and who that unit is going to be. We assigned that to the School Mental Health Advisory Council, or I should say the State Board assigned that to the School Mental Health Advisory Council. Which I think is a very appropriate place for it to go. I happen to serve on that council. It's chaired by our board president, Kathy Bush. And you know, as we started those listening tours, I would say, as much as we talked about bullying, we probably heard as much back about mental health. And what we hear from community members and from schools is really the impact that this has on the students' mental health. So we felt like it was really appropriate to go to this council. We talked about wanting to have stakeholders. The School Mental Health Advisory Council is really a broad-based stakeholder group that we think would be a really appropriate place to do that. So that is a group that's been assigned to carry out this work. The School Mental Health Advisory Council, this is really important to know. We talked to the legislature, House Ed Committee sometime this week. And these conversations came up about doing the work, kind of that accountability piece. How do we know it's going to happen? So it's important to note that the School Mental Health Advisory Council is advisory. Its role is not to make regulation or policy or statute or any of that. What we do is we take the recommendations that we're going to cover. We're going to dig into that a little bit further and really kind of hone in on some implementation type of recommendations. And then we take that back to the state board. And the state board is the ones who will really decide how this work is carried forward. So at your tables, we passed around two things. You have a full copy of the report, and it's a fairly comprehensive report, so I just ran one per table to look at. However, if you go to the KSDE website and you go to the don't look up bullying, go to the blue ribbon task force on bullying, then you can pull up the full report and it's there. I also wanted to pass on copies of recommendations and just review those kind of quickly with you to give you the sense of our conversations around that. The first recommendation, and it's on this 2-page front and back sheet, first recommendation, better support and direction for school districts. What's happened with bullying, and it happens with a lot of things, you have these conversations, you say, well, like by statute, everyone has to have a bullying plan, you have to have it online, you have to have all these technical solutions, but we don't always provide a lot of support for how do you actually make that happen. So one of the things we're going to do is really get in looking at how do we really support the work and not just have these technical plans and things that have to be produced. Number 2, continue and develop the state's focus on social, emotional, and character development education to address school bullying. This is the recognition that we don't want this to be a siloed initiative. All these things are going on, and bullying is just one more thing that we add to the plate. There's a lot of really good work going on right now in the area of social emotional learning, around the social emotional growth board goal. That is preventative, is addressing these areas that are concerning. So we don't want then this to be a separate thing. We want to build on what's there, build on what districts are doing through the area of social emotional growth. The third thing, examine the current state statute and determine if it requires reconsideration. First thing we learned, we went across the state talking to educators and to parents and students. Nobody knows what bullying is. Everyone has a different definition for bullying. And for years, it was the Obeus definition, and a lot of districts still are using the Obeus definition. However, state statute changed. And if you read state statutes, there are some things that are kind of interesting there. And one of the things you'll read in the recommendations is, we're going to make some recommendations to the board. Not that they change this because it's a statute, but look at the implementation of this, because things like repeated. Bullying is pervasive, it's repetitive, that Obeus model, that repeated piece is taken out of the statute. It's not in it. One incident can be considered bullying. I'm not going to say that's right or that's wrong, but it doesn't really align with what current research says. The Obeus model talked about power imbalance, and in the current statute, that's not in there. But if you read research says, yes, that's very much about power imbalance and very much what bullying is about. So we're just going to recommend that we take a closer look at that and determine how we make sure that our practices align with research. Number 4, local policies and plans must focus on relationships, school climate, culture, and the mental health impact of bullying in schools. You can read through that, but the real intent here is this is not a technical solution. There are things we need to have. We need to have a good plan. I'm not suggesting we don't. We need to have good plans. We need to have accountability. We need to have good curriculum. We need all that there. But we're really talking about a lot of what we talked about in our Kansas Can effort, and that is really rethinking how we do business and really changing the culture and climate of our schools that address this, where you have those opportunities for kids, there's that trust building, that relationship building, things that really do positively impact this work that don't get measured in technical ways. On the back page, we go to number 5. The state needs better data on school bullying and measures for assessing program effectiveness. You're gonna read a lot of stuff here about the CTC survey. How many of your districts do the Kansas Communities of Care survey? Quite a few of you. That survey has received a lot of support. It received support during the Attorney General's youth suicide awareness and prevention efforts. They had a task force. They came out in support of the survey. The School Mental Health Advisory Council, as they were doing their work around suicide prevention and awareness, made a recommendation to continue to support the use of this survey, and the state board approved that recommendation as well. However, we also realize that there are some issues with the administration of that. So I want to be clear that this group is in line with supporting it. We agree with it. It's really the only statewide data we have. And because of the way our social and emotional growth outcome is measured, we keep those measures locally. So what you're doing locally to measure social and emotional growth, we're not going to see. So we really have one statewide instrument. But what we're suggesting is there's ways that we think it could be improved. There's ways that we think that we could increase participation in how it's administered. And so you can read a little more about that in the recommendation. Number 6, addressing cyberbullying. This, I think, is going to be an interesting piece for the Mental Health Advisory Council. We all know it's there. We all know it's increasing. We all know it's particularly, I can't think of what I'm trying to look for. It's insidious. I mean, it's a particularly hard or difficult way to deal with bullying. It can be anonymous. It can be done outside of school. It can be brought into school. One kid gets it. Next thing you know, they forwarded some simple thing to everybody on their list, and now thousands of people have it. I mean, it's just really, insidious isn't too strong of a word. How that can really be a problem for students. So we know we need to really address that. However, we think we are miles away from really knowing the best way to do it. So that's one I think is going to be a lot of work being done in that area through the council. Lastly, number 7, training, professional development, and teacher preparation. I'm not going to focus a lot on the professional development piece, but I want to talk about the teacher preparation piece because we feel like as a task force, and I think Dr. Ginsburg would concur, that we're getting students coming through pre-service programs and they hit our schools and we're retraining them when they get there on the things that they didn't get during pre-service. And we feel like this is one of those areas, really social emotional learning in general, not just bullying, but that we will take this and probably run this through the Professional Standards Board to look at how do we prepare students when they're coming out. Not saying we don't continue with PD when they're in our buildings, absolutely we do. We need to start on that front end as we go through. So those are the recommendations that will that were approved, that will go to the School Mental Health Advisory Council. Our first meeting is February 13th, and we're going to hit the ground running doing this work. We were at the House Committee this week. They've asked us to come back every few months to bring information. There's a lot of interest in where this is going. So we will hit the ground running next month, and I'll be glad to entertain any questions you might have. All right, Brad, turn it over to you.
Okay, I promise not to do infomercials during transitions unless it's upon request. But Natalie, there is, so as Natalie comes up, as Randy talked this morning about the importance of early childhood, there is a lot going on in this space. While she is getting ready, this is somewhat relative to early childhood, so this is not an infomercial. But for all of you, because Natalie may cover this, how many of you have a 4-year-old at-risk program? Okay. You will not have to, this year, request slots. And you're going to need to know this over and over. All we want you to do from now moving forward is serve 4-year-olds. We are not going to issue slots anymore. If you have a kid 4 years old that meets the requirements and you're serving them on September 20th, they will get counted. So we're not going to issue, you've got 20 and then 22 show up, serve 22 and you're going to get funded 22. If you have 90, whatever it is, so go build your programs. Get kids in. Because we think we're at that threshold that if all the rest of the 4-year-olds out there in Kansas that could be served and they meet the requirements, if they all showed up, I think the money allocated. The problem is we keep trying to back into some number and we give one district 20 and they have 18 show up and another district could have used it. It's just, so we won't issue slots. We will fund any 4-year-old that meets at-risk, the 4-year-old criteria if you're serving them on September 20th next year.
Will you have to complete the application?
We still have to have an application, and you're going to walk, so that's going to be covered through, but I just want to make sure that you kind of get that. Because if you're thinking about, well, we'd like to add another, but we're probably not going to have the slots, go do whatever you need to serve as many as you can, and then we'll get funded. And you're like, well, that's different. Yep. We've never been able to do this, but we think we're getting to that threshold that we can cover all the rest if they show up.
Thank you. That was a big chunk of my time. We don't have to cover now. I appreciate it. Thank you.
But they need to hear it a second, third time to sink in.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump right in because I know we're getting past lunchtime, right? Maybe it will not good. No, we won't start it. Found the button. All right. There it goes. All right. So our early childhood grants were released a couple weeks ago. So we've got our Kansas Parents as Teachers, our preschool aged at risk, and our Kansas preschool pilot, or the KPP grant, are all out on our webpage, ready for you all to download and complete and get in. They are due on April 3rd, and we hope to announce awards in mid-May. Our website does include our last webinar that has more detailed instructions and discussion on how to complete those applications, as well as a frequently asked document that we continue to add to. So as new questions come in, we keep adding that to that. So Brad just talked about our exciting news that there's no more figuring out how many slots you're going to need for your 4-year-olds. If they show up, they meet criteria, they're there and enrolled on September 20th, they're going to count for your 4-year-old at risk. They're going to get 0.5 FTE. You do still need to complete the application because you do need to have your program approved. We just want to make sure everybody's using curriculums that are evidence-based, along with some other requirements for the grant, and make sure that you're agreeing to those assurances. So we are going to ask you to estimate the number of 3- and 4-year-old students who meet that at-risk criteria. Just like this year, you'll be asked to report the 3-year-old students who meet that at-risk criteria. However, we don't anticipate that there will be sufficient funding available statewide to serve those 3-year-old at-risk students next year. Just trying to kind of feel out how many of those 4-year-old at-risk students we actually are going to have show up, so we're really excited about that. We do have several changes to the program requirements for both preschool aged at-risk and our Kansas preschool pilot. So one of the changes is we have children experiencing homelessness is included as one of the at-risk criteria. That, in the past, they automatically qualify for that anyways because they're going to be free lunch. We just wanted to point that out and kind of match some of our partners across the state and other programs that do call out homelessness. You do need to report that in your kids collection system, and they need to be included on the district's official homeless list. Another new requirement is snack or meal is required. We did a survey and found out that most people were doing that anyways. If you need help with funding on that, please do connect with our KSDE Child Nutrition and Wellness for resources on helping with funding. We also are really excited to announce, we know in preschool that snack or meal time can be really important for learning, good instructional time. We get a lot of social emotional, we get a lot of, you can incorporate your accounting or colors or nutrition. So that is going to count to your 465 required hours. In the past it was not. This is just for preschool. And we also want to remind everybody that that 465 instructional hours delivered is the bare minimum. Kansas weather is completely unpredictable. We want to make sure you're planning in for all those snow days and other emergencies that come up to make sure you're covered with that 465. We have also reduced our maximum class size to 20. There is a waiver if that's something is coming up that 20 is just impossible to make. There's going to be a waiver available while we get used to that. 20 little people in a classroom is a lot of little people in a classroom, no matter how many big people you have in it. Yeah.
I just want to clarify because of how stuff works on the SPED side of things. When you say 20, if you have a half-day program, 20 in the morning, 20 in the afternoon?
20 in one classroom at one time. So
that's what I just said.
Yes, you can, I'm sorry, yes, you can have 20 in the morning, 20 in the afternoon, not 20 program-wide. The child to adult ratio remains at 1 to 10. So if you've got 20, you're going to need at least 2 adults in there. Another update is we have attendance records required for each student. In our survey, it looked like everyone was collecting that anyways. We just want to be sure that everyone's encouraging those regular attendance habits early so that we can avoid the chronic absenteeism problems later. What else? We no longer, in the at-risk application, have a budget section. You guys are already doing that for your district budget. You don't need to do it again for the at-risk application. It is still in the KPP application. That grant is a little different, and it's not a per student award. It's an overall lump sum, so that one does still require a report. There is a short end of the year report that will be required to be submitted. This is to meet reporting requirements set by legislature. Programs will report the number of children, the number of staff that receive training, and the results of the at-risk program. And this is just district level data, it's not child level. All right. So in our preschool aged at-risk and our Kansas preschool pilot programs agree in their side assurances to implement an evidence-based curriculum and provide evidence-based screenings and assessments. As part of the application, programs report on tools that they're going to be using, and they must be approved by our early childhood team during the application process. So again, this is why we are completing the application for the at-risk program. So here's the definition of evidence-based that comes from our evidence-based best practices for at-risk program and instruction page on the KSDE website. This site's filled with guidance on best practices and resources for assisting students in meeting requirements for evidence-based practices. And it has a section just for early childhood as well, so you want to check that page out and go to early childhood. In the past, our team has accepted research-based curriculum and assessments to be used in early childhood grants. So if your tools were accepted within the past couple of years, we're going to continue to let you use those. We do not want for everyone to have to instantly go out and buy brand new curriculums and assessments. However, if your program is looking into new tools, now is the time to make sure that what you are adopting is evidence-based and fits this definition. So KSDE does not recommend or endorse specific curriculum, but we do love to support you in your work, and we encourage districts to consider what will best meet your needs and align with your curriculum as you move on through kindergarten and your older students. If your district is engaged in work with the TAS and MTSS and alignment team, this is often a good complement to the conversations about the district's data and other educational strategies. Programs must implement an evidence-based preschool curriculum that includes literacy, math, and social-emotional components. When selecting criteria, programs should consider the plan for monitoring ongoing progress, including additional assessments, any supplemental curriculum or materials that are used to address literacy, math, and social-emotional development. You want to consider your training plan and make sure it includes teachers, assistants, paraprofessionals, and related services staff. And it's highly recommended that our directors and program administrators also receive this training. You also want to consider how it aligns with the rest of the school district, and consider with the new dyslexia recommendations that it should be, programming in literacy should include strong evidence of instruction in phonological and phonemic awareness. So a little bit about our screenings. Our requirement is each child receives an evidence-based screening. Many programs ask if they have to use the ASQ. There's no requirement that you use the ASQ. We highly recommend it. Programs are required to make sure that each child receives a developmental screening using an evidence-based screening tool, and that you share the results with the child's family. You can determine when you want to give those screenings. You can give them prior to the start of the school or once school begins. Students who enroll after the beginning of the school year must receive screening within 90 days of enrollment, though. So, like I said, the ages and stages is not required unless, if you're part of the LEAP grant, there is a requirement that grantees are expected to administer the ASQ between August 1st and September 20th for all students and report that data. So a little bit about our evidence-based assessments. Early childhood special education programs already have a curriculum-based assessment. If your district contracts with a service center, you'll want to obtain this information from your provider. Programs are required to implement an evidence-based assessment to measure children's developmental growth upon entry and exit of the program. And at the end of the year, we will be collecting some data on which evidence-based assessment you used to measure progress in the areas of literacy, math, and social-emotional development. And then for each area, you'll share, based on the assessment data, how many preschool-aged at-risk children in your district showed improvement from the beginning of the year until the end, and also just how many children were assessed. This is just some additional information regarding curriculum. If you're looking at getting a new curriculum, these are some great resources you can use. They are also in our grant application. And then we talked about new reporting requirements. So programs will be required to implement our evidence-based assessments and then report on them. And we discussed that already. What assessments you used, how many children were assessed, and how many showed improvement are the 3 points you're going to collect. Yes?
Can you tell me how we're going to provide that feedback? What system do we use?
So it's going to be in, actually that's my next slide here. So preschool pilot grantees are going to share their answers to that through this year, actually both years, we have got it into Foundations for School Success. So that's the authenticated application that y'all have access to. So Foundations is where it'll be. Looking forward, we're also going to be asking what research your school district relied on in determining that your need for preschool-aged at-risk services, or assistance exists in your community. This is based on statutory requirements for data collection. This right now is in the new survey. We will be asking this in Foundations at the end of this year as well. All right, and then Amanda just asked that we give a quick update on our work to strengthen early childhood in Kansas. The Children's Cabinet holds all of the resources on the efforts to strengthen early childhood in Kansas. We continue to work on that strategic statewide plan for early childhood. You can connect with the Children's Cabinet and get a feedback form where you can share information there. There's webinars that occur every other Wednesday at noon that we share information across the state. And there are also weekly email updates available through that website. From our team, you can join our early learning listserv. Just email Becky and she'll get you on there. Our next webinar is February 14th. What better thing to do on Valentine's Day than listen to that? There's also a schedule of dates, and how you join is on our webpage at the bottom of the page. And then you can always just email us if you have any questions, or give me a call. Any questions for me? All right, thank you.
Lunch is available. You know the routine. As soon as it looks like you're starting to annoy each other, we will get back up and rolling again. And take a break, have some lunch, have some good conversations, and over the time, if you think of questions, write them down, and we can address some things a little bit later. So, thank you for the update, and we are officially on lunch.
Okay, please continue eating. Don't stop on my account. Much of the information that I'm going to share with you is probably information that you already know. But I did want to take the opportunity also today to just briefly, at some point, go into the KSDE application and be able to show you some of the areas where you can find certain things, because we have been receiving a lot of calls about where do you find the artifacts, how do I end up uploading, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to be able to give that demonstration today as well. Perfect. So the first thing that I want to start off with is just the remaining Zoom supports and trainings. We've really had a good response to this. You know, we've had from the beginning 119, 20 people on, and it really hasn't diminished that much. I mean, we've been getting 60, 70, 50, so we appreciate that. I know that many of you have asked about the recordings and whether or not they're going to be up there. We did finally, I was able to finally put up the December recording. We're working on the November one. The October one will not be up there because it did not get recorded for some reason. I did something wrong. Nothing new, right? And then the January one will come up shortly as well. So those are up on our website. The other piece is the system training. We do have one more system training that will be held on February 25th. We added this training as a result of requests from the field. Systems, I guess, as one person spoke to another person, we ended up being asked whether or not another session was going to be put on. And so what we're going to be doing is doing that session at KNEA right now on February 25th. I will tell you that the venue might change. We do have getting to the higher numbers where they will not be able to facilitate us. So if we do change the venue, I'll send an email through the to everyone who has registered. That is the link to the registration site if you haven't done so yet. This training, systems training, if you were at a systems training, you might see, oh, well, this is longer because the other ones have been 9 to 12, and this is 9 to 3. We added it a little bit longer because we did add some additional pieces, trying to make connections more intentional with KSDE, as well as to be able to allow systems to work for a little bit longer time. I think that was one of the things that we got feedback in terms of the work time together was just not enough. So we extended that in order to include those pieces. The OBT chair and member training, I know it says OBT chair. This time around I said and member training because it doesn't mean just because you're not an OBT chair. If you're a team member, there's no reason why you can't come to the training as well. It would definitely help you and your team as you go through it. So just because it's been out as an OBT chair training doesn't mean that as members you can't attend that. Of course, if you're interested in being a chair, again, you can go through this training. We do have an initial piece that would at least give you some of the logistical pieces for that. And I'm hoping that by next year we'll have a webinar or a video or something that could help new chairs on all of the logistical pieces. Something similar to what we did last year, which was a lot of logistics, okay? We have on February 5th is the Smoky Hills one. That registration is directly through the service center. And then on February 11th is the last one here, and we will do that at the Kansas Association School Boards meeting. Okay, so hope to see some of you there. The registration is located on the KISA website. If you need to access it, you can go to the popular resources on the home page, click Accreditation KISA, and then find the area that says KISA conference call and training information. When you click on that, you should be able to find the recordings as well as the information on the trainings and Zoom supports and stuff like that. So the next piece is really an update on the KISA application. And if I can have Brian. Brent. That's right. I always call you Brian. And you respond. That's a problem. Here. I'm going to have Brian, I told you, Brent, come up. I know.
Come on,
I'm sorry.
get it right.
I am so sorry. Okay. Well, put it, yeah. Or close it, either way. I don't, oh, there it is. Oh. There it is. Okay, and right here. Slide it. Well, you could do that there and I'll slide it. So I'm not able to right now get on our website directly in order to be able to show you on the test site how to see this from a district perspective. So I have asked Brent to be gracious enough to really upload the information for me. Yeah. So, as you know, when you go into the KISA application, you go into KISA. Once you are here in KISA, this is what, as a district, you actually see. How many of you are individuals who actually access this KISA application? So this is what you end up seeing here. This is information. One of the things I want to indicate is that we have changed the initial report. We have separated it, where it used to be all 1 through 15 or 14 questions. Questions 1 and 2, we have taken it off of the report because those 2 questions are questions that tend to get updated regularly. And if you submit your report, it had to be unsubmitted every time that you wanted to make a change. So we have put that separate so that you can go in and make those changes at any point in time. Submitter information is just who is your contact at the district level or at the system level, and then who is your chair. If your chair changes, then we need to have that information here. Importance of changing that in your system is that when you get a new chair, the request for your application goes to the superintendent, right, or goes to our IT, and then IT asks us, is this the chair for this district? The list that I have is normally one from previous, right? So I have to go into your district through administration and see if that information has changed or not. If I don't see it change there, then I'm calling you to say, hey, do you have a different chair, and would you please go in there and update that? So if you get a new chair at any point in time, please change that at that here in the submitter information area. The same thing for whoever is your contact. This contact information where it says submitter information, it really doesn't mean who hits the button. I mean, it's kind of a bad wording for that, and we'll try to fix that, but it's really about who is the contact. So when letters go out to the system about either accreditation or about trainings or whatever, this is the list that we use, okay? And so if in there we have the board chair or one of your administrative assistants, know that the information is going to go to them, and just have them be aware that you want that information transferred to whoever is the person that needs to receive it. Other than that, then on the initial report, you still have then all of your system yearly updates. And the part that has been really mostly new is, if I can find mine, where did it go? Tell me when you see it. Okay. Where did the cursor go? Okay, well, can't find the cursor. But systems response. In the systems response area, that is where you will find, I'm still trying to, where the artifacts piece is at. Oh, there it is. Okay. When you click on that, there's a drop-down box. In that drop-down box, you have your artifacts area, and people have been asking, where do I find that? So it's under systems response, okay? So when you go to systems response, then you'll find your artifact page, and I'll try to keep this cursor visible here, where then you select your artifact that you want to, the artifact type that you want. And in here, what we have done, and this might need to be adjusted a little bit, after this was done in this fashion, I thought about, well, maybe we want to make sure that some of these documents, maybe they're not just documents in general for educational structures or social, emotional, kindergarten readiness, etc. Maybe it's information that goes into, this is what we had in year 1 for these areas, this is what we have for year 2 in these areas. And later on, as you're using this more, you can tell me whether or not this is a good list or if it needs to be changed in a different fashion in order to assist your needs better. But you just select what kind of document it is that you're uploading, if it's in year 1, if it's assurances. If you're in year 3 and you want to provide data, you end up saying, okay, this is a year 3 document. Then when you go in, you go and choose your file. The file should be on your computer, okay, wherever that's at. So you'll choose that file. The URL is if you have a URL where you're posting it to. We really hope that as we do this, we're always concerned if there's any viruses or whatever, but we gave that option. And then on number 3 is give a short description of the artifact. So from there you can say what you have uploaded and what the purpose of it is. So that as a chair, if a chair goes in, they'll know what they're looking for. If it is the Accreditation Review Council, they'll know what they're looking for as well, if you want them to see it or not, okay? And you'll know that you have uploaded this because, let's see if I can do this here. It should show up. Do this, it's going to do something to me. Okay. It should show up over here. I know you can't see that, that's because of the way the screen is, but in that right-hand area, it should list what the artifact is. And so it'll list the name of the artifact, it'll list for what type of artifact it is, as well as give the description of the artifact. Okay? You as a system, the chair, the Accreditation Review Council, and us at KSDE as administrators are able to access that. In addition to that, when systems, how many of you here are systems that are going to be accredited this year? Okay. So when the ARC gets together and accredits a system and does the recommendation for accreditation of the system, there will be a report that is produced that will be sent to you. This is another reason why that submitter information becomes critical, because that's the person that's going to receive it. Okay. So once you do that you'll get a email saying that your report or your accreditation recommendation is in, and then you need to come here and do this area for accreditation. And it'll give you what the report is, so you'll be able to see that as well. And then from here, from this report, once it's in there, then you'll be able to either accept the recommendation or appeal the recommendation directly from there. And that information will come to us. Last year, when we had the reports, the system was not in place, so what we did was call people. I mean, that was the easiest for us. Now, we can actually do this directly through here. The other piece is the system compliance, and I've been working on this yet. We're planning to provide you with that information, and that compliance area has that application piece has been developed. I'm in the process of trying to get our folks who are going to do the compliance piece of the agency trained on how to use this. And that way, I mean, it seems foolish to me that you would be answering compliance issues when we have your compliance already on hand. So we'd rather just give you the compliance. If you find that something is wrong with it, you can let us know, okay? But otherwise, we'll give you the compliance information that we have, and that compliance information can also then be seen by your chair, et cetera. So eventually, the question on compliance is probably going to be reduced a little bit, because right now it's pretty big, and every year we're talking about it. Well, we're planning on doing this every year. So hopefully it wouldn't surprise anyone if we had any documentation missing, for whatever reason. It happens. Any questions on any of this? Yes?
So can you expand on the types of artifacts that you use? I know you said not to throw everything in there, but what types of artifacts?
Right. So one of the reasons that we ended up building the artifact piece was that in the KSDE application, it does not allow you to have data. It doesn't allow you to put charts or whatever. And so we ended up getting a lot of requests saying, well, how do I put this in? I not only want my chair to see it, right? And so you had a Google document that had it for your chair, but I want to be able to provide it to make sure that it's there for the Accreditation Review Council when they come in, okay? So if you have data that you want to share in terms of progress, because remember, we have your data that we will be looking at in terms of the board goals, which is that one-page accountability, right? And we talked about that. I sent something out about that I think freaked most of you out, but that's okay. So we'll have that information, and the ARC will have that information. That's one of their first documents that they will be looking at. But what you do locally and the growth that you see in terms of your strategies and implementations and things like that, they're not going to have that information. So if you think that those things are critical in order to tell your story, then you can go ahead and put that in there. What I don't want it to become is an electronic notebook like QPA, okay? I have really, we're gonna monitor it, and I've said this before, I think that if it does become that, I kind of thinking I might just shut it down, and then think about how we can do that a little bit better, maybe get a group in, discuss it, because that's not the point of it, okay? But for documentation, data, things that you want to show, highlight, perhaps, if when you review your chair report, the chair is saying certain things that then you want to just add some verification for that purpose, sure, that's fine. But not everything.
For instance, we have some of our buildings saving that in a Google Classroom, which is where their building goals are. Would it be appropriate to simply link to, show the link to the classroom, rather than try to just pull out, look at this one, look at this one? Or would it be more preferable to say, okay, within that, here are two we want to highlight?
I would do preferably, here are the two that we want to highlight, rather than putting the link. I'm not on the Accreditation Review Council, but I know that if you put a link, I'm just thinking of the Accreditation Review Council members, they go to that link and then it's like, what am I looking for? You know, because there's so many documents in there. And that just takes more time in reviewing things, okay? So if you could be very specific about it, I would suggest very highly that if in your reports you don't have good information on what your goals and your goal statements are, that maybe your improvement plan might not be a bad thing to put on there. Okay, but I wouldn't put every year's improvement plan. I'd probably do it at the end of the year because that's really where it is. And then if there has been changes, you can always describe that. I'll tell your story in the report, in the systems yearly report. Does that help?
It does, and of course, I will ask, so I will ask, is there a minimum on here? Obviously, the maximum is it can't be unending. But I'm sure they're hitting what the art would want to see. So as we're thinking about the number of artifacts,
Mm-hmm.
I can show you.
So for that, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit, we have the accreditation criteria that is out that the ARC has kind of reviewed and put together. And although right now it's out there, it is a kind of a document in progress. They used it last year briefly, and then they updated it, and then so they're going to use it again this year. And I wouldn't doubt if some things get updated again based on that. Okay. There isn't any minimum and there isn't any maximum of stuff, but I would just ask that you be very purposeful and that you understand that the ARC is a group of 18 individuals now, soon going on to 25, but that have 4 days that they come in for accreditation purposes. They come in twice in April. Sometimes those days would be one right after the other. Sometimes they're separated depending on schedules. And then they come back in June for a couple of days. That's all they have right now in terms of doing. I'm not saying, okay, after I say that, I don't want you to think that they won't come back again, okay? Because these are dedicated people that are more than willing to come and they want to do what's right. And we know that if at any point in time, the ARC does a recommendation for conditional accreditation on any school, and the State Board of Education agrees with that recommendation, that there will be some things listed on needing improvement and maybe a time frame that they're expecting it to be done for. Okay, so they'll have to eventually either come back, or that's why we developed the application. So that when the time comes and you submit that information through the artifacts, here's what you have requested, here's what we have done, etc., then they can go in. I can send an email, or they can end up going in and saying, okay, this system is now ready to be reviewed once again. We had them unconditionally accredited, and you requested some information, here it is. And Joe, Johnny, and Mary, and Jane are going to go in and take a look at that. Okay, so there's no minimum, no maximum. I would just be purposeful in terms of what you're doing. Do not try to overwhelm them. I will tell you, if they get a lot of information, it's not going to be reviewed with detail. They'll try, but at some point in time, it's like, this is too much. And so then we're out, maybe calling the system and saying, hey, what of this will give us this information? Okay, you put all these documents in there. What is it that we really need to look for or look at? Okay, so be purposeful in terms of really what you want to put in there and what you want to see, what you want them to see. Okay, at some point in time, it's not on this update, but one of the things that we wanted to try to do is also, with the artifact that you put in, identify who it was for. Okay, so if it was an artifact that was specific for the ARC to see, that you can say this is for the ARC. And if it was just a general that anybody can see, you would end up putting that. Or if it was for your chair and team members, you can do that. Okay. Did I answer your question and your question? Okay. Any other questions on this? This will be the first year that it has been implemented, so we'll take a look at how it works. We're going to be doing a survey towards the end of the year, not only about the application, but in KSDE in general, just kind of that survey that we did the first year, because that first year was just the beginning and we wanted to get information on what was going on. So we're going to do that again now that it's the third year and see how things have progressed from the first survey to this second survey. That'll go out later this summer. If not, I'm going to close this down, and I'm just going to continue on here. Thank you, Brent.
You're welcome, Jeanette.
So you have the location, the usage, and the ARC review process in terms of the accreditation criteria. That accreditation criteria is on our website. If you go under accreditation, when you click on it, the first two things is the guidance document, and the second one is the accreditation criteria. Okay. Many concerns about that accreditation criteria. I'm being accredited this year. Do I have to end up using this accreditation criteria, etc. The best way for me to say this is that the ARC does know when you came into the system, right? So they will consider that as they review the documentation and as they use the rubric or the criteria to make some determinations, okay? So I wouldn't worry so much about that, but they are looking also in terms of use, is it effective, right? Because they've updated it, so they'll be looking and see, did this really work for us, did it not work for us, etc. The accreditation criteria, even though it is for you, it's also more for them because that accreditation criteria is based on the executive summary that has to be written for our State Board of Education. Okay, so it kind of falls in line with the questions that they're answering for the State Board of Education. All right? At some point, again, I go back, we're going to backward map that. So this is what the board wants, this is what the ARC is looking for, this is what the system should have, and this is what the chairs need to kind of answer. So we'll do a kind of a backward mapping on many of these questions. They might not look exactly the same, but they will touch upon many of these things. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about this year, but I do want you, as a chair, it would be very, very important for us and the Accreditation Review Council that when you're writing your when you're writing your OVT summary after the visit, that you take a look after you've written it, that you take a look at the criteria, or while you're writing it, take a look at the criteria and see, am I addressing any of these things? Will the ARC be seeing answers to some of these questions or not? Okay, because I think that any system that has been doing KESA, whether they started in a year 1 or a year 5, this is all process. This is really logistics. These are things that were expected anyway. There really shouldn't be any surprises on that. Okay, so as chairs, that's what I would end up doing, particularly since, and I know that many OVT chairs and team members find it a little disturbing, I guess, but the ARC does take a look at that OVT report first before they go into the system reports, okay? They're looking at that first to see if they can really determine much of what's going on based on what they've written and how much they have to go back to look for. Any questions about the accreditation criteria? Okay. The next piece that we have is just general information, just reminding systems that if you're in a year, this is your first year after having been accredited, you still have to do the KESA initial report as well as the system yearly update. Okay. If your systems that were accredited 2019-2020, you'll need to complete the KESA final report that's in there, as well as a system yearly update for year 5. All right. And then all systems have to do a system yearly update based on their respective cycle. What I will always remind individuals is in systems is that it's really important that that report for a system be written and completed prior to the visit so that your OVT chair and team could have some time to review it and make some determinations about maybe what kind of questions they have, what kind of things they want to talk to you about, what they want to see, if they need to really meet with any particular focus group. That report will give them that information, so it becomes very critical that that system yearly update is completed before the visit. The other thing that I will end up saying is, and I know OBT chairs have said this before, try to complete the report before you leave. We all get busy. I know personal experience how I have the best intentions and then get busy and it gets delayed. But more importantly, once the OBT chair has done their report, that you as a system go in and read that report. Don't think that, okay, they did their report, it's in there, that's fine. You know, it's been met, they'll find it. Because if that report is not a true reflection of what they saw, or that you think of what they saw, then you should be talking to that OBT chair to say, hey, I really think these kind of things are really important in here. You didn't talk about anything about, I know you talked about our 2 goals, but we're also working on early childhood and there's nothing in there about it, okay? Remember, Randy this morning said, you really should be working on all goals, on outcomes, and that's very true. Just because we say select a couple of areas for that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be looking at your data and trying to see if you maintain or can increase in any way those other outcomes that are state board outcomes. Accreditation Review Council, the ARC, meets this month. And then those are the dates of their review. They already have those listed. We're increasing the numbers from 18 to 25. And they have already begun preliminary reviews. They've looked at those systems that are coming up for accreditation right now. And some of the things that they found that were some issues were a lot of acronyms, so they didn't know and they couldn't go back to find out what that acronym was. So think about that as systems or as chairs if you're writing your reports, maybe even as systems. It might be that the system never explained it either, and then so that's why it's being written in the same way, right? A whole list of programs that are in the reports. This is not only about the chair report, it's also about the systems report, because they've looked at that. And if you say, oh, this is all that we're doing, and we're doing Accelerated Reader, and we're doing Adventure Island, and we're doing all these kind of things, right? It's not telling them which one of those things are really having impact. So that's kind of the thing that you need to think about is what of those programs that you have is really creating the change in your system. That's one of the reasons why we're doing the evaluation training, to talk about that, okay, for systems. No impact comment statement. In other words, the school is doing great, they've really improved quite a bit, but no, what do you mean by that? What does that mean? Okay, so trying to get some of those pieces. The goals have not been stated, and for whatever, and the reason that that's up there is that our state board has asked to really list what the goal statement is, and understand that your goal area of relevance, rigor, or whatever that is not your goal statement. It's just the area that you're focusing on. So from that area that you're focusing on, what are you really implementing that really relates to that area and relates back to the state board outcomes. Minimal conversations on the buildings. In other words, we talk all about the system, but nowhere is it listed what's happening in the buildings. Are the buildings also being successful? Although this is a systems approach, right? At the system level, and that now we're accrediting at the system level, understand that buildings still have a part in this. And I say it over and over again, the district, at the district level, the district itself does not have students. Doesn't matter what they implement at the district level if the buildings aren't involved. And really, it's about supports to those buildings, right? So those buildings need some type of plan of action to see what they're doing and how what they're doing is really impacting, again, the state board goals and the changes that we're looking for in KeySet, okay? So we talk about outliers. And so we get that information in, this building is an outlier, et cetera. But other than that, they're not seeing anything about some of the other buildings. So think about that as you're writing your system report, and as chairs, as you're writing your OBT summary. Any questions about that? Okay. If not, then I just wanted to let you know that the Advisory Council is still meeting, which is different than our Accreditation Review Council. And we have a meeting on February 3rd, and there's 2 more meetings, there's 3 meetings left by the end of this year. The areas of discussion that we are still having on the Advisory Council are foundational structures, trying to develop some success criteria for that. With KISA, we say foundational structures should be in place, but we haven't really provided any information about what those foundational structures really mean. And so we have tiered framework with support. Does that really mean MTSS, or does that really have some particular criteria that we're looking for in terms of a program, right? We have equity and diversity. Well, what does that mean as a foundational structure? Stakeholders engagement, what does that mean as a foundational structure? So this is going to be the next thing that they will be tackling in order to be able to provide more details to you about what the expectation is for that. And that way, when you answer your questions on foundational structure, it could be more precise in terms of what is being looked for, okay? Because right now, it's kind of, not knowing is kind of a little over the place, right? The KISA redesign rubric work is still continuing. We have put a halt on that for a number of reasons. And then our KISA regulation and guidance has just gone to the board all over again. It's going to go next month to see if the board approves it to go again to the Department of Administration. You've heard about bullying today. I believe a little bit of dyslexia, that's whatever. So those pieces which are part of what legislation and others have said, schools have to have policies, schools have to do trainings. We're adding that into the KISA regulation as compliance pieces, okay? And so those 2 areas had to kind of be developed, and so now they're in those regulations, and now they will go back. We do expect that it will go faster this time than we had before, mostly because the changes are really around those areas and not the whole entire KISA regulations, okay? Once those regulations are done, we need to divide, the Accreditation Advisory Council will be charged with doing a guidance document on all those regs. This is our context for KISA. I will say, I should mention that we will soon have another employee. Stephanie Hill will be our other KISA consultant. She comes from us with a private school background in education, has been involved also with KISA as a chair and a team member, and part of her work is going to be to try to focus on many of these private schools, which is right now, I mean, we have about 79 different private systems, which when you take a look at it in terms of about 286 is about, you know, it's a third almost, right? So we want to be able to just, and I know that it's their choice because they're private schools, but we want to make sure that even if it's their choice, that they're doing it right. Okay, so she'll come and that'll be part of her responsibility as well as with KISA. Other than that, if you have any questions, you can contact any one of us. And I'm Jeanette Novo, since I did not introduce myself at the beginning, but I figure everybody probably knows me, which is a bad thing because we all have changes, right? And if you have any questions, you can definitely contact me. Any questions now before I hand this over to Brad? Okay, great, thank you.
All right, big round of applause. Okay. Just trying to wait to charge the loose after a nice lunch. So we're going to invite our author, Stephen King, up. He actually is an author, and his name actually is Stephen King. So as he pulls this up, again, this, like I said at the beginning, These are things that you just need to start getting on your radar that's coming relative to the workaround recommendations that the board hopefully will approve, right? I'm getting lost. That will approve next month at the board meeting. And again, a lot of these committees have come out as a result of trying to prevent legislation to tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing around computer science, dyslexia, bullying. So there's frequent recommendations coming forward. These will be hopefully approved next month.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, not Brian. I'm not Scott. I'm Stephen King, that's my name. I did not write those books, so let's just get that out of the way right now. I did write much of the one that's in front of you. I've laid out a few copies of the standards on every table. If you did not get one and you want a copy, please do see me. I've got some more copies. I've hauled them all the way across the great state of Kansas several times, and I would love to not have to haul them any further. So I'll happily give you a copy if you get one. So I am here to talk about computer science standards. Now, first, I do this presentation quite a bit, and I always start with this particular slide. Because this is the Kansas State Board of Education vision of a successful high school graduate. And you notice it's not just academics. Obviously, computer science is an academic topic, but computer science is also a technical topic. It's also, we have computational thinking, so it's cognitive skills. I've talked to employers all the way across the state of Kansas, and one thing, if you look at computer science just as programming, those jobs tend to exist in the eastern part of the state, Kansas City, Wichita some. But the computational thinking skill set is involved in many other jobs, many other employment scenarios. I've talked to manufacturing folks, I've talked to agriculture folks. You can't even buy a combine these days. It doesn't work off of a computer-based system to sometimes drive itself, sometimes gather yield information, do algorithms on the fly. So computer science obviously is an important topic. At the Council of Superintendents, I said, what is keeping us from teaching more computer science? And these were some of the answers that were thrown up there. You notice many of them have to do with staffing, finding teachers who are competent, that sort of thing. So it is a big deal. There are other things as well. And so we actually got together. Now, the standards that are in front of you were adopted by the Board of Education last April. We got together the March before that, started talking about it, had several meetings, went across the state a few times, went through 3 different drafts, and we ended up with the standards that are in front of you. So we're really proud of that. When we finished the adoption process for the standards, at that same meeting, the commissioner turned to the board and said, and we're going to be doing implementation plan, which meant that I was going to be doing implementation plan. So yeah, that's kind of where we started last April. So we've gone through, we've created a task force last June. We've gone through several drafts. We actually had 4 different subcommittees. We've gone through and done our state listening tours. I see a couple of familiar faces, so a couple of you have been to those. We had 4 subcommittees talking about various aspects of computer science implementation. Obviously, there's what I call the student experience, because I didn't want to use the word policy at first. It ended up just being a policy subcommittee where we talked about all the different policy issues related to computer science. Computer science is an academic discipline, but it's kind of unique in that there aren't a lot of other academic disciplines that actually have industries and lobbyists who are pushing successful implementation of computer science. Computer science does have both of those. I don't know if you followed the legislature, but last year, for example, there were a couple of bills, one of them that would have mandated that every student in Kansas get a computer science course. One of them would have required us to adopt computer science as a graduation requirement. Neither one of those made it out of committee because the committee, most of their comments were related to the fact that it really is an education decision in Kansas. Kansas leaves a lot of our decisions to the Department of Education and the Board of Education. So that basically is why we were doing what we've done. Now, we also talked about teacher preparation, had a subcommittee working on that, a subcommittee that was looking at curriculum, and one that was working on this topic that I call ecosystem. And the ecosystem, I took that term from Kansas City. In Kansas City, the KC STEM Alliance, run by Martha McCabe, and has several great people working for it, has actually won national awards for their ability to foster the communication between educators, business people, community facilities like libraries and STEM centers, in order to benefit computer science education all the way up and down the chain. So that was a subgroup that got together as well. Out of that, we actually had 5 recommendations to the Board of Education, and that's what I presented last meeting. That's what they're going to beat me up on next meeting, and then vote on the day after. So we're looking forward to that, and I actually have a little bit of your feedback if we can get that at the end. But so first of all, the first recommendation, this actually comes from one of the lobbying organizations, Code.org. Code.org says that you really need a person statewide who does computer science stuff. And it kind of makes sense. At the time, I was working on the CTE team. I was the IT and media consultant, and I agreed to do the computer science standards. I was never really an academic standards person. I wasn't actually on the overall standards team. It was a great time, and I enjoyed it. But the idea is there needs to be somebody over computer science standards who can do all kinds of stuff, including the ecosystem stuff that we've been talking about, working with business and industry people, working with curriculum people, working with professional development, and basically overseeing the entire process. Now, this is a recommendation. I'm kind of glad to say that this recommendation has already been adopted. There is a position out there on the KSDE, actually I would say the Kansas website, for a computer science standards person. I am begging everyone to apply for it or send someone to it if you know someone who'd be interested. It's a great position, going to be working with a lot of great people across the state in implementation of computer science standards. Recommendation number 2, and you remember that one of the legislature's things last year was they were going to mandate all schools offer a computer science class. Well, that language has been toned down, and just so you know, some of the national lobbying organizations will publish maps of policy, and one of the things that everybody on my subcommittee talked about was wanting to improve the accessibility of computer science and computational thinking education across the state of Kansas. Every kid should have the opportunity to learn computer science, learn computational thinking, learn technology. I don't think anybody disagreed with that. The issues were capacity, the issues were mandates, the issues were other things as well. And so we kind of went back and forth. What we came up with was encouraging all schools to offer computer science. Now the numbers I put up there, one of the things that the lobbying organization does is they'll publish maps of the U.S. and show that Arkansas requires everybody offer a computer science course. Kansas is blank. Other states have done this and that and this and that. And one of the statistics they publish is that Kansas, 26% of the districts in Kansas, 26% of schools in Kansas, offer computer science. Now my numbers kind of refute that, because we actually have the IT programs, 143 districts, 193 high schools, with 1,785 courses. That's almost 50% are actually offering some sort of computer science, computational thinking kind of course. Let me ask you, as a curriculum people, how many of your districts offer something in the computer science field? Cool. And we actually, again, have a mentee here in a bit. Okay, so that's recommendation 2. Recommendation 3 ended up being one of the more controversial ones that we had. Let me kind of set the stage for this a little bit, because to a lot of us, graduation requirements are what basically fill in the required base for people to go on to post-secondary and post-secondary success. So it's making sure that our graduates have what they need to succeed after high school, and that kind of makes sense. Other people, parents, business people, see them a little bit differently in terms of a prioritization, if you will, a statement of what is important. And so the argument is made in a lot of places that computer science should count as a graduation requirement. According to the data from code.org and the data from Education Commission of the States also kind of aligns with this, nearly every state has a computer science graduation requirement. Now, there's 47 of the states right now, which is pretty intense. Now, it's hard to compare even because, for example, Arkansas. And one of the things is Arkansas is held up as the computer science state. They put $15 million a year into it. It's a big deal in Arkansas. They allow a student to count computer science as a math or science credit for graduation. They also require 4 credits of math. And so if you count computer science as one of their math, then you're graduating with 3 credits, basically, in math. Kansas, of course, has a minimum requirement of 3 credits of math. So if we lose one, well. There's also New Mexico is an example I bring up. But New Mexico passed a law not too long ago that allows students to count math, or to count computer science as a math graduation credit, as long as the students have also had Algebra 2 and Geometry, which are typically considered years 2 and 3 of math. And so it's hard to compare directly from one state to another, but the recommendation of the committee, after going through math and science, and some states allowed to count as a foreign language and so on, is the computer science should satisfy a core graduation requirement in science. Recommendation number 4. Now, Kansas used to have a computer science, it's actually a computer studies license. In fact, when I talked at a programming event at K-State, I got all the teachers together and I said, okay, how are you teaching programming? What's your license to do that? And there were a couple people who still had the old computer studies license. It hasn't been used in about 20 years now, almost 20 years. So the subcommittee for this said, let's create a licensure for it. One of the problems, as you probably know, with licensure, though, is it tends to be a barrier, and we don't want to have barriers to teaching computer science. And so they came up with a few different suggestions. One, let's take the current pathway teachers and anybody who's teaching computer science AP exam and give them the endorsement because they're already teaching the courses. Second, for existing teachers, we already have the praxis exam as an option. There's a computer science praxis exam, so that just kind of makes sense, right? The third is for pre-service teachers. And I've been working with the education department at Wichita State. I've also talked to educators at some of the other institutions on how to implement the computer science standards into their pre-service programs. The fourth, and this is kind of interesting because our licensure department is already working on a micro-credentialing kind of opportunity. Well, it makes a lot of sense to do that in computer science because there already are a lot of different certifications, some of which actually count for college credit. And so why not build a menu that a teacher can follow and can look at and can gain certification through basically a micro-credentialing opportunity. That's recommendation 4. Now, recommendation 5 is the big funding one. How do you fund all of this? And like I said, Arkansas is $15 million a year, and they're kind of held up as one of the great standards. Now, in Arkansas, it's not just professional development, it's not just curriculum. If you are a senior in Arkansas in high school, and you take the AP exam in computer science, if you pass it with a 5, you get a check from the state for $1,000. Pass it with a 4, it's $500. So they incentivize computer science AP exams. Other states are doing other things. Pennsylvania, their delegation told us that they were putting in $20 million. Washington is a couple million. Even Wyoming, I think they're the lowest population in the states. They're spending $1 million just on computer science. Kansas is spending money on computer science right now. It's just we're not spending it directly on computer science. It's between the pathway funding, the Excel and CTE funding. We've got the Microsoft Imagine Academy funding. So we are spending money on it. The problem is that when a lobbyist tries to build a map of the states and show policies related to computer science, they don't count that. And so right now, Kansas is blank on that map. So the question is, if we're going to train teachers in how to implement the standards, how much does that cost? And what the committee did is they looked at Code.org's calculator. Code.org actually has a calculator based upon the states, based upon the number of teachers you have. They said based on just normal data, it should cost about $500 per elementary teacher, about $6,000 for every middle and high school teacher. And so let's wrap that into the number of teachers we have. And the number came out to be almost $5 million. Code.org also says we're currently teaching in 26% of our schools. So take out 26% of that, because obviously they're already doing it. And that's where they came up with a $3.5 million. So divide that into 5 years, a 5-year plan, and it's about $700,000 per year. That's to train teachers. There's a couple of more little funding bits. One is $100,000 for salary and all the other stuff for this consultant position. No, none of us make $100,000, so it's no. But also regional support stipends for building leaders, another $200,000 per year. So basically it works out to be about $1 million per year. The question, of course, is always going to be, where's that money coming from? And that is not a question I have any idea how to answer. But like I said, in order to implement computer science education or any real education type of initiative, it costs money. So those are the 5 recommendations that we made. Are there any questions on those?
Can you go back to the 3rd slide?
Recommendation 3?
Yes, sir. So the recommendation is a math or science core?
The recommendation the subcommittee made was a science core graduation. Again, it was a mix. It was a big debate, a very long debate, because the idea is that we want to emphasize computer science. We want to get more people taking computer science. At the same time, we don't want to keep people from succeeding when they get into post-secondary institutions. And so it becomes,
So, what are your thoughts? Because this is where we need your input, or we need you thinking about this. There you go.
I made a question, so if you don't mind, if your internet connection on your device works better than mine does, Minty.com, the code, if you can't read it, is 503432. There's 2 questions. First question is, should we count computer science in the minimum graduation requirements for a high school graduate across the state? And there's several different answers. One is yes as a math. There's one yes as a science. There's one yes as an additional requirement. There's one that's as a foreign language, and one that basically is basically no. Are we done with that? Got that one? Good. Okay. So when you do that, question number 2 is, does your school teach computer science? And there's a couple different options with that too. There's obviously no. There's a yes we do as an AP exam or an AP course. There are IT courses out there that count as programming and some districts I've talked to actually just have a programming class. It's not part of a pathway. It's not part of the AP structure. It's just a programming class. So, do you teach computer science? Okay, has everybody had a chance to answer that one? Anybody who hasn't? Go back. So you know the answer, the result of this, 10 would be, in addition to current requirements, in place of math and science are the yellow and the green bar. The red bar, which looks kind of fuchsia, is 10. That's in place of a math or science. 7, the blue bar is in place of something else. And then 11 was not graduation required at all. So thank you for the input. Do you want to get somebody smarter up here? Dr. Lynch-Wonder?
No, I was just going to say, you're going to hear these stories about, well, New Mexico allows it to be used for math. True. But they also have a requirement that to graduate high school, you have to have at least geometry and algebra 2. Oh, that changes it. You know, so there's a lot of scenarios that the state board could look at. We know of another state that says, yes, you can count it towards one of your math graduation requirements. But that state actually requires 4 credits. And we require 3. So there's all of these anecdotal or whatever, but I think most likely what the board's going to look at is approving that it could be used as a core credit, and then have some discussions with the science and the math, you know, so, but that's, you know, is it needed in today's? Yes. But we're gonna have to transition to that. What I'm most excited about as, who's up next? Are you done? Oh, good. Oh, so as Cindy comes up and gets ready, what we're most excited about, we now have some standards in computer science that goes down to the early grades to really to provide you some standards and some resources on how do you get kids early on doing computational thinking that is not just setting a kid in front of a computer. So just keep that on your radar because there will be a lot of trainings, a lot of information coming out in the future on that. The timeline is the board is to take action on the recommendations, and then like anything, then the work begins. And I don't know, Scott's not here, I don't think anymore. We are, have advertised, I don't know where we are in the process, to hire someone at the State Department to oversee computer science. Stephen King kind of adopted that because he's like really, really smart and was the best pick, but he's not our computer science consultant. So anyway, Cindy had a key.
Okay, we're waiting on a PowerPoint, so before I get started, y'all need to stand up for a minute? Go ahead, just do it. Stand up, stretch. Lord of mercy. Well, you know, I'll start off with some sad news. My grandfather passed a few weeks ago, and that man, you know, he literally had the heart of a lion, literally. He was also banned from the Memphis Zoo for his whole life. That was funny. I have a handout, but I've been saving it. I didn't want you all to read it and ignore me, so I have a handout. And I'll give it to you about midway through this. ready to go. My name is Cindy Hadeke. I'm the elementary program consultant at KSDE. And I've been blessed with carrying this torch for the State Department. And it is an important topic. So we're going to go through a few things here today, and then I'm going to stop frequently for questions because I know there's a lot out there, and I just want to make sure that we're getting through those. But here's your classroom teacher's plate right now. It's pretty full. There's vaping going on in schools. We have social emotional issues in schools, poverty. Kids have trauma. We have state assessments to prep for. ACT, if you're getting ready to graduate from high school. Oh my gosh, there's these things called state standards. We have to work on those too. And school redesign is part of this effort. Our LEAP grant, working on literacy in several districts in our state. KISA, I could continue, but now we're adding one more thing to your plate. Or are we? What I want you to think is, I want you to reframe this. We all teach reading. Every district in the state teaches reading. And it's not about adding one more thing to your plate. It's about redesigning our instruction for those readers so it's balanced. We have a good balance of training, balance of screening, high quality instruction and intervention. So I don't want you to think as one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. We really want to make sure that it's a balanced approach, and we're talking about it in the lens of struggling readers, okay? That's what I want you to get across. We're helping kids who are struggling to read. So, the definition of dyslexia that the school board passed is rather intense. So I want to take a minute to look at it. So, a specific learning disability that has that's neurobiological in origin. What does neurobiological mean? It's brain-based, and it's part of your biology. It could be inherited. It could be you had an uncle or a grandfather or a father that struggled to read. It's both of those things. It's characterized by difficulties in accurate and fluent word recognition. Word recognition is able to see words with automaticity. Therefore, the brain deficit impedes that. Or spelling. People ask me all the time, do we need to teach spelling? Well, that's one of the big signals of students who have characteristics of dyslexia is they're very poor spellers. They don't understand, they can't, the spelling patterns of our language are difficult for them to retain and difficult for them to remember without explicit instruction. They also have issues with decoding abilities, which we all have a picture of that child in our mind right now. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. That's your foundation. The phonological component of your language is your foundation. It's where it all starts. In the womb, our children are learning the language that they're born into. They're learning that in the womb. So it's a deficit there. It's also unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities, meaning children who have characteristics of dyslexia or who have dyslexia are very intelligent. They are very good at covering up that disability. And it's sometimes a surprise to see that this child who has read fluently all the way up to 4th grade, not had any trouble, is all of a sudden falling to pieces now that we have multisyllabic words and higher tier 2 vocabulary. And the provision of effective classroom instruction, which is what the main part of these initiatives are all about, is about effective evidence-based classroom instruction. So, secondary consequences, as you all know, impedes reading comprehension. It also has a big lack of growth on their students' vocabulary experiences, and it impedes their ability to retain that background knowledge to move forward. So, breaking that down, it really does make a little bit more sense that it's not just about a child reading letters backwards. So, dyslexia is not about vision, it's not about hearing. It is not a disorder regarding vision. It is not seeing letters and words backwards. So if that myth exists in your district, that needs to be expelled. That is not what dyslexia is. It is not attributable to having poor intelligence. It is not due to low motivation. It is not due to poor teaching. Your teachers are working their tails off. It's not their fault if kids aren't getting it. So take that sigh of relief that it is not due to poor teaching. Dyslexia is not rare. Statistics say about 15% of American students have characteristics of dyslexia. 15% out of a class of 25, that's a lot of kids. And it is not something that can be outgrown. So students who have dyslexia or characteristics of dyslexia have to learn lifetime ways to correct those issues in their brain development. So let's talk about training. This is the question I'm getting all the time. Who's got to be trained? When do they have to be trained? These recommendations are actually going to be part of your KISA regulations. This was presented to the Kansas State School Board in January. Of course, they will approve them, or tentatively approve them, in February. But after that, they have to go through that whole cycle. They have to go to the Department of Administration. They have to be peer reviewed. Then they have to be edited. Then they come back for open comment, and then they're approved. So this is who we propose to receive the training.
Is this in your handout?
It is. All teachers endorse elementary education. That's unified elementary ed, that's K-6 elementary ed, that's K-9 elementary ed. If they have an elementary education endorsement, they need this training. All teachers who are endorsed early childhood unified need this training. High incidence special education. I was talking to a district the other day. Well, in my high school, I have math special ed teachers who are high incidence teachers. They don't need the training, right? No, they do. They still need to help a child understand how to break down words in a math problem to get to the comprehension part. So yes, any endorsed teacher, high incidence K-12 special education needs the annual training. This one is a stickler. All English language arts endorsed teachers. That means middle school English language arts and high school English language arts. They need the annual training. All teachers endorsed as reading specialists. All endorsed school psychologists. We are also thinking, we just had an internal meeting 2 weeks ago, and we're thinking about adding all elementary principals on there. However, elementary school administrators would not receive the in-depth training that these people would receive. They would receive an abbreviated training to help them support and understand what needs to happen in classrooms. We highly recommend that paraeducators receive this training. We cannot require that because paraeducators aren't certified staff, they're classified. That costs money, we understand that. But all of your paraeducators require yearly in-service anyway, so this could be a great way to provide the in-service for your paraeducators in your district. Okay, what questions do you have? Yes?
So if I'm a reading specialist, I'm a endorsed reading specialist, but I'm working as a reading specialist?
You're gonna have to be trained.
So then our principals would too, if they're endorsed as an
Correct.
teacher.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah, if they have those endorsements, yes. But I could have an elementary principal that's a high school PE teacher. They also need the training. Does that make sense? Yes.
Will you be developing a training so everyone's consistent?
I'm going to get to that in just a few moments. Yes, we are. Okay. Now, the training that they should receive annually should consist of the science of reading. Okay, that's the meat of the training. The committee that I chaired said it should have all these 13 bullet points. But the science of reading covers almost all of these bullet points. And it also, the training should be hands-on, it should be informative, and here's the key. The training should lead to a change in practice, a change in instructional practice. We're still working out what the components of the training will be, how it will be offered. We are looking at possibly having teachers have to pass an exam at the end of the training. These issues are still cloudy. We're still working them out. We don't want to roll something out to you guys and then say, whoa, 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 wait, we're going to change it. We want to make sure that what we roll out is high quality, that it is done with fidelity. These are the recommendations and the bullet points that the task force wanted. That first bullet about science and problems or scientific method, basically that just refers to how do you problem solve when the kid can't read? What happens? What's your hypothesis? How do you work through that? And then we really want to talk about the difference between a research-based program and an evidence-based program. They use the term science-based. They're referring to evidence-based programming. These are the rest of the recommendations. In the training I conduct, the science of reading, I cover all of these bullets in a 3-hour training. So it can be done, and it's not an 8-day process. This part of the training, these last 3 bullets, this has to be done with extreme fidelity to the process. What does it mean when a child fails a screener? Does that mean they're automatically going to be identified as dyslexic? No. Please get that message. Please get that message. We are not trying to increase the number of children who are getting referred to special education. That is not the intent of this. If a child does not pass a screener, we have steps to follow. We're also working in our department on a letter to parents. What happens? My child took a dyslexia screener and they didn't pass. What does that mean? How can we help? What does that mean my school's going to do? We're working on that. I'm working with other departments of education across the nation who have gone through this, and they are supporting our efforts as we go through it. We also want to talk about what intervention looks like for a child who's struggling to read and what progress monitoring looks like. So this part of the training, we really are going to dig in deep and do some deep dives on this. That part of the training may not come in August. That may come later, and that's okay. Okay, that's okay. So in March, our department is meeting with every service center in the state. We are meeting and we are doing a trainer of trainer modules for this required training. Okay. After the service centers leave that training, they will have what they need to roll out the training required by this new recommendation. Anything that you are seeing coming out now that's talking about dyslexia or this or that, that won't satisfy this requirement. So just make sure that we're not ready to roll that out yet. So if you're sending teachers, that's great. But this requirement won't be rolled out until everyone has been trained who's going to be doing the training. We also highly encourage these online modules of structured literacy. AIM Pathways offers an online module for structured literacy. It does cost about the same as letters training. It's about $550 per teacher. It is all done online at your teacher's pace, but it gives not only practical application, it gives you a chance to see things in action, and it gives you the chance to reflect on what you've seen, and it gives you a chance to participate in a community of practice regarding structured literacy. It's high quality training. We have vetted this training at the State Department. It is a high quality training. I'm also going to encourage all of your districts to encourage letters training. Letters is exactly what teachers need to understand that science of reading, to understand that background knowledge you need to teach a child to read. So letters training, I have two districts in the state that have already said, we are going to train a trainer of trainer in our district, and that person's going to be in charge of training my teachers about the science of reading. That's awesome if you have the capacity to do that. That's awesome. And then we also have the science of reading trainings. I'm working on getting a few things out on this. I'm going to try to get some trainers trained from the PD that I conduct in schools. But this training is still in the works. I currently conduct the science of reading training for schools. I will tell you right now, I am on the road all the time. And that's okay. I mean, I was just in Western Kansas for 3 days this week, and we're all talking about this stuff because we want kids to be successful readers. I'm going to give you 3 URLs here, and do they get a copy of this, Teresa? Did they get a copy of this PowerPoint? Okay, so these URLs are in your PowerPoint. These resources will not meet the requirements for training. However, if you want to have a great topic of discussion around a PLC, if you want to start some teachers thinking about what they need, Zaner Blosser has 3 white papers around these topics. Okay? I'm not endorsing a Zaner Blosser product. These are a research white paper. The white papers include the science of reading, high quality, easy teacher read. It's really good for you to put that kind of information to your staff. Building a reading brain is the other white paper they have, and the last one that they have is preventing reading failure. Those are high quality resources. They're free, they don't cost anything. You can Google it, you can get on this URL, you can download it, you can distribute it. It would be a great way, not only for your teachers, but for your administrative staff to have this conversation of, what do we currently do in our district? How does it compare to these practices? What changes do we need to make? All right, I'm gonna take a break now and answer questions, and then we're gonna hand out the handout. Yes?
Here, I know you said that you're working with the service centers in March. Do you have any idea or projection of the length of time?
Yes, great question. She asked about how long is this training going to be. It's going to be a 6-hour training. You're going to have to devote a whole day at the beginning of your school year for this training. It'll be a 6-hour PD. Annually. Yes. Let me back up just a minute. It's not going to be a training where you can say, bloodborne pathogens, watch this video, sign here. That's not what we're talking about. So after everyone's been initially trained, your next year, your training is not going to be a carbon copy of what just happened. You're going to take your teachers from where they are and dig into those bullet points of, do we need more help here on identifying characteristics of dyslexia? That's where your district gets to make those choices of, it's annual, but it's not everything on those bullets. It pertains to your population of kids. Yes?
So, from what I'm understanding, is asking somebody from a service center to say how they find out that.
Not necessarily. It has to be.
Someone from our district that goes to the training.
Yes, your district can contact a service center or myself to get the information they need on the training, and then we can work out with your district how to get that person trained, so that they can conduct. Yes, yes.
So we could bring, for example, like what I'm hearing you say, we need a trainer in this building.
That would be great, and that's something that I could plan even for June, maybe a June district-wide trainer. No, not good. No. Okay.
So like in our district, our best bet is how you would work that with you.
Yep. Yeah, for now. Or if you don't work with a service center, yeah, call me. Yeah.
So this is not something that we want to have in place to where in August your district is now, you find that we're out of compliance with something. What the recommendations say is that by August, we have to have training made available to you. We as in the state. So our first step is most of you access a service center, so we have to go to them first. And we've got to make sure all service centers are trained equally and then strategize what are the different ways that Greenbush can provide either in your district or you coming up. But we first have to get them all trained in this. So by next August, you as districts have multiple options to be able to access training around this.
It would be nice if we could have a conversation with larger districts to try to see if that model.
Right. So thinking about larger districts, we've got to treat you, so we know, I make up a lot of numbers, so here's a new one. or one I've used before. I'm saying about 90% of school districts go to service centers. So bang, we got to get them involved. Larger districts that may have someone on staff, like Cindy said, that this is the person, then we got to get them trained. So there's a lot of options. What we're doing right, she likes it when I throw my name into the pot, because sometimes I'm in the room when they're figuring it out. What they're doing right now is developing what the training needs to be. Because we know that coming into this summer, we've got to start delivering it. It'll be unique to Large, to Shiland, so.
All right, thank you. Yes?
What's documentation districts have to keep in order to provide
Regarding the training, do you have an answer? I do, but
So our thought on documentation, right now, you submit to us every July a local consolidated plan. I'm going to venture that all kids that are identified, you will be accessing some type of title or at risk or whatever. So we look at adding to the local consolidated plan questions like, what screener are you using? So that's where you will validate to us that you're meeting whatever the requirements are.
yes.
So the training that you're training the service centers, will that change every year? So if we send people to be trained for August, then the next year we'll have to send them to get an update training, or is it the same training?
Your initial training is going to be the same every year. So like your new crop of teachers, they're going to get that original training because they've never had it before. But your teachers who've been in your district for a while, it's really going to be based on what your school district needs. What components of those training bullets do you feel like your teachers need more help with? So that's where the local control comes over. You've got the initial training. You're continually doing that. New teachers are getting the training. But once you have the initial training done, the following year, it really gets to specialize on what you and your teachers and your students need. So that training, we're hopefully are going to have a dyslexia coordinator at the State Department that was requested through funding. So if that person helps, that person will help coordinate with your district on, hey, we had this training, here's our data, help me see what our next steps are. There will be support at the State Department for that, but just using those bullets from the training piece, that's where you need to take off and dig deeper for your next year. Yes?
So, I apologize if you've already said this, but have a list of screeners been released yet?
We're going to talk about that in just a moment.
And at what, will this train the trainer module be the only thing that's available?
No.
Will there be resources out there that we can
Yes.
choose to utilize?
Yes. We are developing a handbook right now that will have resources. That AIM Institute, that AIM Pathways training I told you about, will meet all of these requirements because it has. Letters training will meet all of these requirements.
So which part of letters training? There's 15.
The whole module. I mean, yeah, the whole thing. The whole thing. Yeah. Yeah, guys, I did that this last year. I did it online myself. It's deep. It's tough. It's hard. But if you do modules 1 and 2 on your first year of implementation, and then the next year you do modules 3 and 4, and then the next year you do you just keep that continuous cycle of getting teachers trained. You don't have to do all 15 of them in August. That's not the expectation.
Future prep programs, so if they're doing this in all those universities, why doesn't that become sufficient so we don't have to do that first year?
Sure. The question was, what about higher ed? If teachers are coming out with this training, why do we have to keep doing this training every year? And that's
We can move them into second-year training versus the first year.
correct. You could, depending on what they bring with them out of their program. Every program's different, but we are trying, okay, yes. The higher ed piece, I am actually meeting back at the State Department this afternoon with our higher ed standards people, and we're going to be talking about how we're going to change standards to meet these requirements. So if you have a student who comes out of a program and they've got what they need, that's a great question. I don't know if you have to give an assessment, probably not, but I mean, what would it look like to know where your teachers are when they start teaching? Because everyone has different experiences in their student teaching experience. That's a gray area. So I don't have a real. We've talked about micro-credentialing as well. Yeah, and actually, there are going to be higher ed people at this training in March with us. So they're gonna take part of all this as well. We've also encouraged our higher ed friends to do letters training as well. So we're hoping to generate what they need in ed prep so that they don't come out with a blank slate. So. I don't have another program in mind. I will tell you, IDA just said that Letters was a quality program. AIM Pathways is also highly regarded.
The reason I say this is like in ISPs, we don't want to put a program specifically.
No.
We want to talk about the skills we're going to get.
Right.
We're endorsing one, there should potentially be a couple.
Yeah. That's a great question. I hope you don't mistake my saying take Letters as an endorsement of everything. I'm just saying that that's a program that works really well for what your teachers need. Okay, it's not a requirement, it's not, but I'm just saying Letters has what it takes for that to happen.
And just to add on that, the reason we will mention Letters is because through our TASN project, we actually have people contracted and trained around Letters. We don't have people trained on others, but that doesn't mean in the future we might.
Thank you. Okay, here are the subcomponents that you have to screen. These subcomponents are what's going to be required. So, letter naming fluency. Letter naming fluency is a 1-minute timed assessment given usually in kindergartners in the fall, winter, and spring, and usually to first graders in the fall. Letter naming fluency assesses a student's ability to name the letters on a page, both uppercase, lowercase, and in random order. So this is just letter naming. You would be surprised how many struggling readers in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade don't know all their letter names or sounds. The next assessment is the letter word sound fluency. That's a 1-minute timed assessment given to kindergarten students in the fall, winter, and spring testing windows. It's also given to first graders in the fall. Letter word sound fluency, it assesses the student's ability to make letter sounds, to make 2-letter sound combinations, and to read aloud CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant words. Now, if you don't use letter sound fluency, but you have another assessment that meets those requirements, that has a child do letter sounds plus some letter teams plus maybe some CVC words, that assessment would qualify for this, okay? So just make sure that the components are the same. The phoneme seg, that's a 1-minute timed assessment given to kindergarten students in winter and spring generally, and to first graders in the fall and winter. Phoneme seg, basically it assesses a student's ability to segment 3 and 4 phoneme words. I will give you an indication that some assessments that are phoneme seg are really not phoneme seg. There is a product out there on the market right now that says the speaker will say and it'll ask the child to, what did I say? Mom. That's blending. That's not segmenting. Segmenting is how many sounds are in mom. So the child would have to say So just be clear, it's not a blending task, it's a segmenting task. And then nonsense word fluency. Just stress here that you're not teaching your kids nonsense words. If you're intervening, if they don't pass this and you need to do a progress monitoring screen, it's not teaching kids nonsense words. It's teaching letter sounds, CVC patterns, syllabication patterns, open syllable patterns. The research says that if a child can read out of context and blend with automaticity, they transfer that over into context. That's why the out of context in the nonsense word fluency is so important. And then finally, oral reading fluency. And you begin that winter benchmarking of your first grade year. There will not be a list of assessments approved, but we will say several districts in Kansas already use assessments that meet these requirements. Dibbles or Acadians, Bass Bridge, Ames Webb, those all have these subcomponents. Or if you're using one of those and it doesn't, you can purchase the extra subcomponent for your assessment program. There are a few more out there that off the top of my head I know of. The Texas Primary Reading Inventory, the TPRI, it has all these subcomponents. Primary Assessment of Reading has all these subcomponents. So it doesn't matter which one you use as long as it meets these requirements of the subcomponents. The reason why we went with letter word sound fluency instead of random automatized naming, which is a real signal for children who are dyslexic, is there are a lot of programs in our state who don't have RAND as a subtest. So the letter word sound fluency meets the requirements of RAND for identification of kids who are doing things in that rapid automatic naming. Yes?
So there's not going to be a list?
Nope.
So I would assume that means we're going to choose.
Yep.
Based on our training that we had.
Yeah.
And then we're going to report to the state through the LSCP that we use this.
Yes. I will have a rubric.
Nobody's going to come and say, wrong screener?
No. There will be a rubric. The rubric will say, I'm not using, let's just say, I'm not using Acadians, but I have this screener. The rubric will just say, does it have this subcomponent, one where your students screen? Does it have this subcomponent, one where your students screen? And that rubric will help you be able to meet all of these requirements. Again, we're hoping to put that in the LCP so that you can report all of that data at the same time.
The problem with the list, just like, does anybody remember at the beginning of the year?
No, don't bring that up.
When we had to come up with this list of reading programs? How much of a so the bill comes out and says you get reimbursed if you have well, who is going to admit you don't teach reading? So everybody's like, so we had to come up with, here's ones that we know do, and then everybody's like, well, but then I've got it. So we're not going to manage a list of vendors from the thousands of people across the United States who are calling us and saying, we want to be on your list. And we don't know that they do those. We'll put the rubric out there, but we will let you know, just like Cindy said, we know that you are using ones that already do. And you will be able to take that rubric and go, yes, and we will approve that. If yours doesn't, or you don't think, give us a call. We can walk you through. But we don't have, we're not going to create a list of 2,000, because we don't have anyone on staff to vet every vendor out of Utah that thinks that they've got some script. No. We'll have a rubric. You will know with the ones, if yours doesn't, we'll help you.
Okay, thank you. Just a minute. Yes?
Screening oral reading fluency, reading on the handout, that it's first graders, winter and spring, and all other students grades 2 through 12. And then when I'm looking at who needs to be screened, can you clarify when and how often? Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good, yes. Okay, your screening should be conducted, all of those subtests, pre-K, my ADs does a lot of this. I'm just naming programs, but pre-K is highly recommended. The regulation will have kindergarten in it, but we really want our pre-K kids screened if you have them in your district for this purpose. Anyway, pre-K to grade 3. So let's just do an example. I have 3rd graders. Do they have to do letter naming fluency? No. Where do we start with them? Where do we start with all 3rd graders? Oral reading fluency. So if they fail that benchmark, then what's our next step? Phoneme segmentation fluency, nonsense word fluency. That way you can dig into your intervention as skills they're showing deficit skills. So you just back test. Now, I'm going to tell you, grades 4 through 12 has been an issue, but the task force was adamant that 4 through 12 get screened. 8th graders, that's tough. They do silent reading fluency, they don't do oral. So 8th graders who don't pass a silent reading fluency test, what would we do? We would give them a oral reading fluency assessment. Then you can back test to see where your deficit is. 9 through 12, there really aren't any programs that go above 8th grade. I'm gonna be honest, there are a few. My colleague Joanne McGrail and I are vetting a few of those programs right now. We're trying to see what the quality of them is, what probes they have for progress monitoring. We're looking. I had another question when I presented this to the Special Education Advisory Council. They said, I have a 10th grader who has Downs and they're reading at a 3rd grade level. No, why would you give that child no. They don't need to be screened. You have to use, I guess what I'm saying is your professional judgment on those kids at the high school level who have significant cognitive disabilities. At the high school level, it's going to be a little bit tricky. And I'm going to be honest with you, we don't know yet. So is it going to hold you accountable? Are we going to hold you accountable in August if we don't know yet? No, we won't. So until we get some of this worked out, we're still trying to do things well for you. Any questions about this? Yes, Jennifer.
So am I hearing you say we will be testing oral reading fluency or using a silent reading fluency, but 3 times a year?
Yeah, the benchmark times, yes.
For all students?
Okay, let me clarify. So the great question she had was, so let's say I've given oral reading fluency to a 7th grader. They passed it in the winter, in the fall, passed it in the winter, they passed it in the spring, they're done. They don't have to take it again in 8th grade. So once they benchmark those 3 times at their highest skill, they're done. They've been screened. They don't have to take it again, okay? We don't want in every fall, every kid going through this whole rigmarole again. Okay, now most programs under 8th grade are going to do an oral reading fluency for every kid anyway, or some sort of silent reading fluency. That's where you really need to dig into your data and decide where interventions need to begin. But once they've passed it, they've passed it. So,
Starting at what grade? If they pass it, they pass.
I'm talking about oral reading fluency, so 3rd grade 3 and above.
So they test all the grades are done. Like a lot of people that aren't here that we can look at that. All students.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Okay, so what happens after you screen? A screener should be answering a yes or no question. Does this person have characteristics of this, yes or no? After you screen, if you get a yes, if a child fails a screener, then we want to do an immediate review of what they haven't mastered. Again, it's that logical model of the back testing so that you know where you need to go deeper. A screener is not a diagnostic. And I mean, I could stand here and talk to you. You guys are all literate in assessment. But your teachers, unfortunately, we know they are not. So a screener is not a diagnostic. A screener, if they fail the screener, that means, guess what? We need to do diagnostic testing to find out where to start. So after the screener, that's when you have to do a data review and maybe do some back testing. You want to make sure that your intervention follows structured literacy protocols, as well as core instruction. The student should always be in core reading instruction. Not pulled out, unless, of course, their IEP, their specially designed program says they're pulled out during core. But core reading is where they're going to get all that grade level exposure. Okay, yes?
Is that last screen appropriate for K-12 students? Is that all K-12 that goes
Yeah, if they don't pass the ORF, then yeah, you'll have to start doing the back testing, yeah.
Can I clarify?
Yes.
Okay, so if the 3rd grader passes that benchmark fall, winter, spring, they're done?
Yeah,
We don't
the screening part,
You don't
yeah.
have to screen them again in 4th grade or in 5th grade?
So
Now, I'm going to tell you, when we benchmark, do we benchmark all kids anyway? As a protocol, yes. What I'm saying is, you do what your instruction and protocols normally call for. You don't have to pull kids through all 5 of those sub-test screeners who are reading at their benchmark ORF every year for your. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to clarify the gray there because I know it's very gray. Okay. Yes.
The rubric screener tool that we
I'm hoping to have a handbook published April or May. I know that's a long time, but I'm really hoping to have rubrics done as soon as possible. But
so how much flexibility will there be to get all this in place? Because a lot of us will have our instructional text already set for the next year, and a lot of what we're talking about is pretty significant.
yeah, it is. There's going to be significant flexibility. Okay. The school board and the task force had 2 goals. The goals were, this needs to start yesterday, not tomorrow, sooner rather than later. We know you guys are doing it and starting it. We're not going to hold things over you, hold your accreditation, if we see you making efforts to move in this direction, okay? That's not the intent of this. It's not, and I gotcha, at all. Okay, here are the timelines. So if you talk about April, May, we're going to start offering trainings, and with larger districts, they'll have to contact me, and we'll set up some training for their trainers. In August, you begin your professional development over the dyslexia regulations. It won't impact your PISA until 21. So if you start this fall and you're like, we didn't get all that done, that's okay. That's okay. We're starting the process. So take a breath. The same thing, begin to implement evidence-based reading practices. And this is what I really want you to hear. If you use a product, for example, I'm just going to throw one out there, Wanders. If you use that product, don't stop using that product, okay? We are going to develop, again, in the handbook, I'm working with all these other states of education, but in the handbook, there's going to be a checklist that says, phonology, does your program cover blank, blank, blank in this depth, yes or no? Does your program have this, yes or no? You'll be able to take your program and see where holes are so that you may supplement. We're not asking you to buy new programming. We're not asking you to throw out what you're using. We're just asking you to make sure it follows the protocols of structured literacy, which I'm getting into. I'm sorry, I know this is really taking a long time. Are we okay? Okay. Okay. No. Yes. All right, I'm done.
Just to clarify, the professional development component is 6 hours at the beginning of the year. Does it have to be 6 hours in one session, or can we spread it?
It can be split up.
Okay, so
yeah.
I can do it in
August, December, February. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, did you have something?
I just disrupt, so keep going.
Okay. Okay, structured literacy components. When I say structured literacy, I'm not saying uppercase S and uppercase L structured literacy. That means Wharton Gillingham. We do not promote those kind of programs at the State Department. What we're promoting is the pedagogical practice, structured literacy as a practice of a way to teach reading. This includes systematic and explicit instruction, hands-on instruction that is engaging and multimodal, and that is diagnostic and responsive. So in other words, if I see a kid is floundering with digraphs in first grade, I don't wait to benchmark them in the winter to intervene. I'm intervening on digraphs now. These are the components that you will have to, this is on your handout. So these are the components of balanced literacy, or excuse me, I'm going to be shot dead by people if I said that out loud. Okay, structured literacy, phonology is the study of word structure. The sounds of language is manipulating sound. Sound symbol is phonics. It's mapping, graphemes, and morphemes. Excuse me, I've talked too many times today. Phonemes and graphemes. And then syllabication. Syllabication is in our state standards beginning in first grade. So teaching the 6 syllable types, teaching orthography up in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, morphology, the meaningful parts of words, endings, prefixes, suffixes. This stuff has to be intentionally taught with fidelity. It has to be explicit and systematic. And then, of course, syntax and semantics are the way that words are on page that make sense, that our language, when it comes out of our mouth and in print, makes sense. So these are the components that your programs need to have. So let's say you're using Wanders again. Wanders, how strong is it on teaching prefixes, suffixes, inflectional endings? How strong is it? Does it cover it? Does it gloss it? Are kids guessing? Does it teach it that if I'm teaching this prefix, it's always the same spelling and always pronounced the same in every word? Those kind of things you need to be asking when you're looking at your programs, okay? We also want it to be systematic, which means it starts with the easiest skill and goes to the most difficult, that it's cumulative, it builds on skills as you learn them, it's explicit, no guesswork involved, and it's diagnostic. Here's some things that are coming soon. Checklist for your resource checks, training, screening rubrics. Guys, I am working with some fellow people at the department who are helping me a great deal. But when I'm talking about every school district in the state, I'm only one person. So I am putting this material out as fast as I can to help you guys. I don't want you to think that we're dragging our feet at the department, because we really are wanting this to be good stuff. We don't want to give you a product, a system, or anything that is not high quality. So I understand your urgency, but just remember, August is just when we began the cycle. KESA's not impacted for another year, so take a breath there. I know it said August, that's what the school board wanted. The task force understood that, and that's why they gave us an additional year for actual implementation. So beginning the process, yes?
Can you talk about the fact that you just said KESA will be impacted in another year? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it'll be part of the KESA regulations beginning in 21-22 school year.
Now, I know there's this KESA thing out there. If you go in front of the ARC, you're in a year where you're going in front of the ARC, and you have trainings in place. You're going through, here's what the ARC is going to the review council. If you have no evidence, we've done none of this. We haven't even started with teachers training. We don't even have a screener. And you know what? We don't even have a plan to do it. They're probably going to go, Does that describe anybody in here? No. That's the only, so whenever the board approves something that it says districts will screen, then we're going to provide you rubrics, and it's what we need to be doing. Or they would have never, they will never put anything into regulations unless it is important enough for kids that we do it. And the only reason you would come crosswise with the ARC through KESA or the board, if you're like, screw it, we're not going to do that, then yeah, I would worry about KESA. But that's not what we're talking about, or you're not the crowd, or you wouldn't be here. It's when there's districts out there that don't get engaged, they don't try to learn, they don't do trainings, they don't select. Surprisingly, there are a few out there that kind of describes. The board's going to ensure, no, you will, because your kids need it. But that's not people that are represented in here. So don't, when we say KESA, that still holds, you know, this is what we need to be doing, and if some districts are sleeping out there and they're just not getting engaged, that's a tool that the state board can say, no, you will, because you have to.
I'm just going to add one more thing regarding this process. I spoke with Bert Moore, and he told me that since the board passed this, he's had 5 formal complaints around dyslexia. 5. Last year they had 13 total. This is not intended to satisfy special education requirements. There's nothing in the special education process handbook that says anything about this. This is all general ed intervention. This is all core instruction. So just make sure that we understand when we're talking about this, this is core instruction. It is not the quick line to get a referral for dyslexia to special education. Any other questions? All right, you have my email. Please reach out. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. We have probably just a few more minutes. Like I said, so Mike, if you want to come on up. As I said at the beginning of this, there are topics that we shared today that could be 1-2 full days. Bullying, computer science, dyslexia. The goal today is to make sure you have on your radar the work, the thinking, and knowing what will be coming forward to you. Mike has a quick update on a timeline for you, so.
I'll try to be as quick as possible. I just want to draw your attention to a couple papers on your table. One of them is the DGSR application update. Basically, that just has a timeline change that we're going to use with DGSR.
Tell them what DGSR stands for.
The DGSR, the Dropout Graduation Summary Report. It outlines all the changes on there, and we're going to have some more emails and guidance documents that are coming out. But we wanted you to be aware of the timeline change first and foremost. And just look out on the listservs for some more information coming out on that. And then the second thing that I'll draw your attention to is the save the date flyer in front of you. That's for these summer workshops. We sent that out on the listserv already, but we wanted a paper copy in your hands. And that just shows you a timeline of when those are going to happen and what strands are going to be available. Quick little promo. The one thing that I did want to point out is the Goddard location is not Goddard High School. It's going to be Eisenhower High School. And if you have any questions on the summer workshops, take a look at those emails that came out. David Fernkoff is going to be the primary contact for that with the Department of Education. And if you have any questions on the graduation dropouts, feel free to give me a call or an email. My contact information is on the bottom of that page.
And the biggest change with that is the window for you to go in and submit prior year graduates and dropouts is 3 months into the new year. You don't have to do much different. It's just we're sliding that window forward closer to when they actually graduated so you can remember their faces and names. Because when you're 5 months later thinking about the ones that graduated the May before, you're like, I'm already into the next year. So, all right.
Okay, so we're going to give our 25-minute presentation in 25 seconds and modify it on the fly so that you can get on the road and be safe. I'm Tammy Mitchell. I'm the Elementary Redesign Specialist.
And I'm Jay Scott. Wait, what'd you do? Is that what you did? Doesn't work?
Turn it on.
Maybe. Okay, so I had to wrestle that from Brad. Okay, how many Chiefs fans in the room? Oh my gosh, that was kind of weak, guys. That was kind of weak. How many Chiefs fans in the room? All right. How many, and that was hard for me to actually ask that because I'm a huge Steelers fan. And I kind of look at the Chiefs as kind of JV. But anyway, sorry, let's move forward. How many Nebraska fans? Woohoo! Amy Bybee, Nebraska fan. So, a couple things. The Chiefs, right? Success after a long drought, right? But Nebraska, back in the day, when I was, out of high school, but back in the mid-90s, they were in their heyday, right? And I bet you if you went to any Nebraska game on Saturday, you knew what offense they were going to run. You knew what plays they were going to run. Who's a football mind in here and knows what Nebraska ran? Option, right? They ran the veer out of the eye, right? And you knew you were going to see that. How many of you know what you're going to see from the Chiefs on the offensive side of the ball? Nobody, right? Guess why? They clean the slate every Monday, right? And they create and redesign their offense for that next opponent, right? Now, both models are successful, but why would Nebraska's model not be successful now, today, in today's game? The game has changed, right? The game has changed quite a bit. And I propose that the same thing is going on in education. We need schools to be thinking and redesigning and constantly tweaking as you go forward, and now's the time. The game has changed in education. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tammy, and she's going to give our little
So basically, we have, if you want a redesign update, you can tune into the DLS Hot Topics next week. We've got Apollo 2 applying. We've got Apollo, we don't call them Apollo 1 because they blew up. We've got Apollos going through regional trainings. We've got 66 districts, 160-some schools that are currently engaged in the redesign, and we just hosted 2 webinars this week where we had approximately 30 more districts that are curious. So if you want to know more, contact us later. Drive safe. Thank you for being here. Happy New Year, and go Chiefs.
Right on.